Hey, Astro Kids, and welcome back. This is your weekly horoscope for March 1st through the 7th. So, happy March to everyone here. We are entering into a brand new month. Some exciting changes that we are getting ready to enter into here, especially towards the end of March. But we are sitting here in a post shadow phase of Mercury. So, things starting to come back online after this Mercury retrograde that we have just come out of. So, starting off here on the 1st of March, the moon will start out in the sign of Virgo in a Terra Falguni. We just came out of that full moon in Herva Falguni in Leo. So, we are closing out that energy now as we are moving ahead here, things becoming more analytical, more organized. Of course, you want to pay attention to where you have Virgo in your chart. This will affect that particular area for you. The moon will also move into the sign of Hasta later on the 1st of March as well. So it will continue this transit through the sign of Virgo. On the 2nd of March, we will see the moon shift from Virgo into Libra, where it will move into the Chitra Nakshatra. So things starting to change up between these two energies here as we're switching between this energy of Virgo from the sun to the moon to Mars. Lots of energy shifts where you want to look at not only where is Virgo in your chart, but also how is this related to your moon as well. Now, on the 3rd of March, the moon will continue in the sign of Libra, where it will shift from the nakshatra of Chitra into Swati. So, some interesting changes that we're seeing there as well, where there's more of this luxurious energy going on here in the sign of Libra and starting to shift ahead now into Scorpio. Now, also on the 3rd of March, you'll see the moon make an opposition over to Uranus. So, many of you here on this channel have requested that I use these three extra planets in Vedic astrology. So many of you were interested in that, so I decided to throw that in as well. So we'll talk more about that as we get into each of the individual signs and how this will all affect you. Now, on the 4th of March, the moon will shift from Libra into Scorpio, where it will start off in that Swati Nakshatra again, but then later on it will shift into Vishaka. Now, also on the 4th of March, we are starting out a planetary war between Mercury and Jupiter. So, this is a war between the lower mind and the higher mind. Very interesting time as we are moving ahead here. And of course, Jupiter is going to win this battle. As I mentioned earlier, Mercury is still in post shadow. So, it's not at its strongest here. And Jupiter, even though it's here in its debilitation, it is very strong. It has been here for a while. It is backed up by Saturn. There's a lot going on here where Mercury is a little bit weaker coming into this phase. And so this can be an interesting time where you want to level up in your education. There's this battle happening here between your logic and your higher wisdom. And so, really sorting things out on an intellectual level comes in strong as we're moving into this week. And this battle will continue out until the end of the week. So, very intense. Now, on the 5th of March, the moon will shift from Libra into Scorpio. Once again, we're finishing out this Vishaka Nakshatra and moving ahead into Anurada. On the 6th of March, the moon will also continue moving forward in Scorpio. It will finish out its transit in Scorpio as we come into the 7th of March in that Jyeshtha Nakshatra. But on the 6th of March, we are going to see the moon make in conjunction with Ketu. Remember that Ketu is hanging out there in Jyeshtha with Rahu and Rohini. And this is a huge part of this Mars transit that we're going through. where Mars and Rahu are together. So if you'd like to know more about Mars and Rahu and how they're affecting us through this Mars and Taurus transit, make sure to check out my video on Mars and Taurus. I will leave it above in the link and down below in the description as well. On the 7th of March, this is when we start to leave this Scorpio activity and we shift from the moon in Jyeshta into Mula. So we will shift into that Mula Nakshatra in Sagittarius. So there is quite a bit happening here. Of course, we still have that Venus conjunction combustion with the sun that is happening there, where Venus is being burnt out through this entire transit here of Venus in Aquarius. And so, if you'd like to know more about that Venus in Aquarius transit, make sure to check out my video on Venus in Aquarius. I will also leave that above and down below in the description as well. And of course, we have this massive Capricorn stellium happening. Again, you guys wanted me to add in those extra planets. So we have Pluto, Saturn, Mercury, and Jupiter all hanging out there in Capricorn. Big battle once again coming up with Mercury and Jupiter. So quite a bit happening. We're clearing out a lot of energies as we're coming into this first week of March. And next week, we will talk about Mercury coming out of its post shadow and things starting to become more easy as we're moving ahead. But again, a lot of that fast paced energy is starting to take hold coming into this moment as we have this combust Venus that we just entered into, and we just ended that retrograde. So this has been a fast paced time period, but a lot that we're still sort of closing out and settling into as we are moving ahead into this first week of March. So, for those of you with an Aries moon or Aries ascendant, this is your weekly horoscope. And for those of you with an Aries moon or Aries ascendant, we are going to start out the week with the moon in Virgo. So, the moon will be hanging out there for you guys in your sixth house. Again, those of you with an Aries moon or Aries ascendant, you have the original placements of all of those houses. So you have that natural zodiac going on for those of you. The moon hanging out in your sixth house, this can be a good time to focus on your health, to make sure that everything is in order in this area. Of course, the moon can always bring fluctuations, but also your mind may take hold of this as well, especially for those of you with an Aries moon, as this is this mental energy of the moon taking hold in your sixth house. Now, the moon is going to shift ahead into your seventh house in Libra, where it will oppose Uranus, which is sitting there in your first house. So, this becomes very interesting where some of you may want to change up your style. You may want to make changes within your physical appearance during this time, or you may simply just want to try something new. And this can affect your relationship as well, where there can be some change and turbulence in that area. So, you want to be careful with any sort of different changes that you want to take on. Of course, Uranus has that very unexpected energy about it, where you can do things very sporadically, and this can affect the people who you're involved with in your life. So, want to be a bit cautious of that. Now, the moon is going to move on and it will conjoin K2 in your eighth house. Again, this is something that is reoccurring. We have the moon, of course, changing every 2 to 3 days, but this will join up with K2 in Scorpio in your eighth house. Very deep, very intense. This eighth house is the original house of Scorpio, where those deep transformations take place, and K2 strongly connected to this as well. So a lot of past karmas there around transformation. Many of you transforming who you are as a whole on this deeper level. Very powerful here, where you can find yourself going through a lot of transformative experiences in your life that really bring up these deep emotional areas of healing and transformation that need to take place. And this can happen in your relationships as well, as that eighth house is that house of shared resources. Now, from there, the moon will end up in your ninth house of Sagittarius. And so, ending the week here, you may be thinking about your education, especially as we're having this planetary war that's going to be taking place with Mercury and Jupiter. So, your third house lord and your ninth house lord of Mercury and Jupiter in the heavens are going to be battling during this time. And so this can bring up some major decision making around your education. This can bring up some contemplation in this area, and this can affect your career. And so, for those of you who are relying on your logic, on your intellect, on your decision making skills as far as your career goes, this could have a huge impact. And so you really want to make sure that you have studied everything, that you've looked over all of your plans, all of your research, that everything is in order here. That moon is also looking at your third house of your skill sets. So making sure that everything is in order coming into this becomes a huge priority. Of course, you have that combust Venus with Neptune hanging out over there in your 11th house where you can see some interesting things happening with your gains. You can receive a lot of support, but you have this hunger with that combust Venus. Remember that Venus does not behave correctly when it's in this combustion. And again, if you want to learn more about this, make sure to check out that video on this Venus transit through Aquarius. But a lot of interesting things that can play out here where you are wanting more, you're wanting more support, but maybe not receiving it or having conflicts in this area around that. So you want to be careful again how you are approaching your relationships, whether this is with a romantic partner, with a business partner, or simply how you're dealing with other people in general. This becomes a huge area for you during this week. So, for those of you with a Taurus moon or Taurus ascendant, this is your weekly horoscope. And you are starting out the week with the moon hanging out in your fifth house. And so this becomes a very interesting time where education can be a huge focus, but also this becomes a time for you to really just express yourself and to be more creative. The moon is a very creative planet and it's coming here into your fifth house of creativity, where you may be working on a project, you may be passionate about something creatively, and you may also want to seek out help from others, or you may be working in a group setting. The moon is aspecting your 11th house from that fifth house. And so this could be an area where you are working on group projects. This could be an area where you're receiving some support for the things that you're working on, but mindset really focused on creating, working towards your passion. For some of you, this involves your children, where you are more focused on your connection with your children at this time. Again, you want to look at everything in your chart, but this is just going to give you a general view of what is going on. Now, the moon will shift over into your sixth house, so you want to look at your health during this time. This can be a good time for meditation. This can be a good time for focusing on your daily routines as the moon is shifting through this sixth house. Remember that the moon can go through fluctuations, and so this becomes very important here. Now, from that position, the moon is going to oppose Uranus. Again, a lot of you wanted me to add in Uranus into this Vedic system. And so the moon aspecting Uranus here, again, you want to be cautious of your health. A lot of unexpected changes could happen, especially in your mental health, where you could unexpectedly find yourself having some anxiety or some depression, where you really want to make sure that you are surrounding yourself by people who are supportive or that you are doing things that you love. Again, that fifth house becomes very important coming into this week. Now, from there, the moon will conjoin K2 in your seventh house. And so, relationships, as always, for you coming into this year are hugely important, where there's a lot that you can learn from your partnerships, a lot where you can grow and you can go through this healing process through your partnerships. And so, this becomes an area where a lot of growth can come from and a lot of growth that really is transforming you in a huge way. Of course, as Rahu is there in your first house, that axis, really dealing with you and your relationship with others and how that can really transform you on a deeper level. The shadow work. Remember that Rahu and Ketu are shadow planets. And so you can be going through a lot of healing and shadow work in your relationships. And of course, with Mars there with Rahu sitting up in your first house, a lot of confidence, a lot of energy to get things done in your business, in your partnerships, in a huge way in your life. Now, lastly, the moon is going to end up in your eighth house. And so this becomes very interesting where you can see sudden changes and fluctuations happening in your mood as we get towards the end of the week. And so, again, you want to be careful with anything mental health related, making sure that everything is in check. You could find yourself having some ups and downs in your mood where things feel different. You may want to disconnect or you may want to connect more during this time. The moon in the eighth house can take you through some very deep and profound transformations. And so, if you're seeing yourself going through mood swings, this could be a time where you are actually going through a spiritual evolution. You're going through a revelation. You're having this moment of healing that becomes very powerful here. Now, during this time, you also have this battle between Mercury and Jupiter taking place in your ninth house of higher education. And so this becomes an interesting time here where this can be a good time to study. This can be a good time to plan your classes moving forward. This can be a good time to look at leveling up in your education. Again, Jupiter is the one who is going to win out this battle here. And so seeking out a higher level of education versus the lower education can become very promising, especially with Jupiter sitting in his own house, originally in that zodiac. And so this can be an interesting time where you can level up in a big way. Of course, a lot of growth, a lot of change that can happen here in your education in general that many of you may have already been experiencing here in this year of 2021 with this Saturn Pluto Jupiter combination. Now, also remember that you have that combust Venus and Neptune that is playing out there in your 10th house, where you could have a lot of great support and guidance coming in your career. You can acquire a lot in your career. This can become very powerful, but you want to be careful of this desire for more. Remember that Venus is not functioning correctly as it's in this combustion. And so this can bring out a lot of those negative qualities of Venus, of the overindulgence, of the possessiveness, of these heavier qualities where you can want a lot out of your career and status. And this can be very dangerous depending on how you are approaching this. Again, Rahu hanging out in your first house, you may be more inclined to take shortcuts or you may have these intense passions that can't be satiated in your career life. So you want to be careful here with this position. Now, for those of you with a Gemini moon or Gemini ascendant, we're going to start out this week with the moon in your fourth house. Great position where many of you can find yourself having some peace and happiness during this time. This could affect your career life where you could see sudden changes and fluctuations there, depending on where you are as far as everything going on in your chart. Again, this is a general read, so you want to look at everything that's in that chart. But ultimately, with the moon here in the fourth house, you could find yourself receiving some happiness and some peace from your work, where you can actually receive a lot of wealth for leisurely things, for comfort. You could find yourself getting a break from work during this time, or you could just find yourself very happy and very peaceful in your work situation. You could even find yourself working from home if that is in the cards for you during this week as well. Now, the moon moves over into your fifth house, where this becomes a great time to work on team projects in your career. This becomes a great time to work on your goals and ambitions. The moon hanging out in the fifth house gives strong creative abilities, and this is looking over at that 11th house. And especially with Uranus in the opposition, you could find yourself receiving unexpected gains from your work life. You could find yourself getting unexpected inspiration to work towards new goals, to come up with new ideas that can really transpire you in a huge way and make a lot of things happen here for you in your career. Now, also, this could be reversed. Remember that Uranus is an unexpected energy. So you could find yourself going either way. This could bring you some difficulties in your work life, in your projects, in dealing with others as well. So you want to be careful about this energy. But this could be a huge time where you could be a pioneer, where you can come up with a lot of inspiring ideas and you can make some big moves in your career. Now, the moon will shift into your sixth house, hanging out with K2. And so you want to watch your health. And this is a huge thing throughout the year of 2021 as K2 is hanging out there in your sixth house. K2 really is not concerned with the physical. K2 is about our past lives, our mystical knowledge, and so forth. And so this could be a time where you want to really be careful of maintaining a solid routine, sticking to the things that need to get done with K2 there in that sixth house, especially in the sign of Scorpio, where you could find yourself in some very difficult and unexpected situations, and especially with Rahu. Remember that axis there of Ketu and Rahu, Rahu hanging back in that 12th house, where you could find yourself overindulging. You could find yourself having some fears or unexpected obsessions or difficulties back in the subconscious that can really trigger some difficulties in your health, especially with Mars there. Mars back in that 12th house looking at your sixth house. So you could really run into some accidents, some injuries. So you just want to be cautious here about your health and your routine. This becomes a huge area of focus for you. Now, the moon hanging out in your seventh house to end out the week becomes a very prominent position. Again, this becomes a great week for business for many of you. The moon hanging out in that seventh house, you can be able to connect to others really well, lots of empathy and lots of understanding. And you may find yourself coming up with brilliant ideas to share with others as well. Once again, now we have this planetary war of Mercury and Jupiter happening in your eighth house. And so, once again, you can find yourself bringing up a lot of deeper inspiration. Remember that eighth house is connected to hidden knowledge, such as the occult, mysticism, research, investigation. And Jupiter is the one that is winning out this battle between Jupiter and Mercury during this planetary war. So, a lot of deep wisdom and understanding that you can pull up that can give you these great ideas and inspiration in your business. This can bring in a lot of profit. Again, it's hanging out in that eighth house, which deals with shared resources and, of course, aspecting that second house of wealth as well. And not only this, but Jupiter is aspecting that 11th house of gains and support as well. So, again, a lot that you can gain and receive during this time, which is fantastic. Now, from there, Mars is going to aspect that third house. And so, once again, this becomes a great time to receive a lot, to use your imagination, to really focus on your business ideas and inspiration. So, a lot that's happening between this aspect of Jupiter and Mars, where they're highly connected and bringing a lot of this great inspiration and deep knowledge to the forefront. Again, that eighth house and that 12th house, very deep areas where a lot of mystical and inspirational knowledge can be pulled up to the surface for you. Now, for those of you with a Cancer moon or Cancer ascendant, this is your weekly horoscope. And so we're starting off the week here with the moon in your third house. This is great. Many of you very expressive, very communicative during this time with the moon here. A lot of great ideas that you can bring up to the surface. And so this can be a time where you're very technical, where you have a lot of great ideas and inspiration that you want to share with others during this time. And so, very good that you are connecting to others and expressing yourself. For those of you who are trying to hold back, this can be very difficult, especially as the moon is connected to your sign of Cancer. Now, from there, the moon is going to shift into your fourth house where it will oppose Uranus. And so, this is interesting. You can see some changes happening between your home life and your career, where you might find yourself with a new project or a new task to take on that can bring up some emotional difficulties within the home, or you may find yourself more connected to the home, needing to nurture others or needing to be there present in the home situation during this time, which could bring about some unexpected changes and fluctuations there in your career. Now, from there, the moon will shift into your fifth house where it will hang out with K2. A lot of deep wisdom and knowledge that you're able to pull on here with this combination. And this creates some real success in your hopes and dreams where you're able to use that creativity, use that deeper knowledge and understanding to really strive towards your goals and ambitions. And you can find yourself really wanting to connect to others during this time. Again, many of you, even from last year, you may have found yourself working in teams a lot with Rahu there in the 11th, but especially becoming more prominent here with Mars. Now, you do want to be careful here. Mars is not really friends with Rahu. And so you could find yourself in a lot of conflicts and difficulties with others during this time. So, really, this becomes a great time to focus on your mission, on your goals, on your hopes and dreams. But you could see some arguments and challenges in your work life, especially if you're working in a team. Now, from there, the moon is shifting over into your sixth house. So, you want to pay attention to your health during this time. You could see some sudden fluctuations in your health both mentally and physically. This is the moon in the sixth, aspecting over to that 12th house. And so you really want to pay attention to your routine and your health. This could be a good time for meditation, a good time for focusing on your daily routines during this time. Now, you do have this planetary war happening in your seventh house. And so this is where you may find yourself having difficulty in your relationships. With this position, Jupiter is going to win out Mercury. And so you will have a lot of knowledge and wisdom to share. And this can benefit your business partnerships. This can benefit your relationships in general to others, where you can have a lot of knowledge to share to others. But you want to be careful here. There is something to say about Mercury being in this weakened state as it's still coming out of its post shadow during this time, where you want to watch how you are communicating, how you are putting these thoughts across. Some people may not want to hear your thoughts or ideas. Remember that Mercury and Jupiter are battling. And so that wisdom, that greater insight, and then the logic and the communication are not together. There's this tug of war going on there, this contemplation, and you may find yourself not wanting to speak up or express your views at this time with this planetary war. But this becomes stronger where you can really bring out those views and beliefs towards the end of this planetary war as Jupiter wins that battle. Also, remember that you have this combust Venus with Neptune in your eighth house. And so this can be an interesting time where you can find yourself really wanting to lean on others, wanting to get closer in relationships, where you want to be careful that you're not overdoing this area. There can be a clinginess or attachment happening as this is in your eighth house. You can be a bit possessive during this time. This is Venus in the eighth house opposing that second house. So you want to be careful. You could find yourself wanting to attach to family, or you could find yourself wanting to attach to deeper, more intimate levels of connection and really wanting to support others, wanting to have others support you. And so this can be a time where you're more emotionally involved, but Venus is not functioning correctly in this combustion. So this can create that over possessiveness or overindulgence in those connections. Also, this could play out in your wealth as well, where some of you are a bit more concerned with your wealth and your income, and there can be this overindulgence of wanting to attain more. So, this can be a bit difficult here with this position. Now, you do have Mars and Rahu hanging out over in your 11th house, away from that Moon and K2 combo. So, again, there's a lot that you can gain in terms of wealth, but you want to be careful that this is not an obsession to just acquire wealth and materials. This can take you over emotionally during this time. Now, for those of you with a Leo moon or Leo ascendant, to start out the week, you have the moon in your second house. So this can be very good for your wealth or very bad. Remember that the moon fluctuates. And so you could see some difficulties here where your wealth goes up and down during this week. The moon, of course, is only going to stay here for a small amount of time. And so some of these concerns can subside here as the moon shifts forward, where it will go into your third house, where this can be a time where you're more expressive about your ideas. Moon here makes this very emotional, where you really want to get those thoughts and ideas across to others, especially with Uranus there in your ninth house, where sometimes you want to be careful about communicating, where your thoughts or beliefs can come out in a very unexpected and offbeat way that can rub others the wrong way. So you want to be careful here, but ultimately you could find yourself unexpectedly coming up with some great wisdom, some great ideas that can really help you to level up in many areas of your life, but especially in education. That ninth house there, of course, is connected to higher education. Now, from there, the moon will shift into your fourth house with K2. Very intense. This is your fourth house of home here, where many of you are very connected to your home right now. You may find yourself wanting to shift or change your location. You may have already shifted and changed that location, and you are sort of settling in here with this moon activity in your fourth house. Or you may find yourself simply wanting to change things around the home. Course, you want to look at everything else going on in your chart. You want to look especially at your Mahadasha period. Those of you who are going through a Moon Mahadasha may really be seriously considering moving or changing your location in a big way with this Moon activity. With K2 here, and of course, this is a short lived transit, but this will come back around. But with the moon here with K2 again, lots of changes that can happen in your home environment. You could find yourself wanting to withdraw or seclude yourself, to really go inward and to go through a lot of deep inner transformations, a lot of spiritual connections. You could be tapping into past life situations during this time. And this can somehow help you to actually move up in your career and your status and your achievements. And many of you can be very passionate at this time about your career life as you have Mars and Rahu hanging out in that 10th house. Very powerful positions for your 10th house. Now, from there, the moon will end up in your fifth house, where you can be very creative during this time. You can find yourself wanting to collaborate, wanting to share your ideas and vision with others, wanting to work on projects, wanting to work towards new goals. At this time, this can be a great time to tap into those creative skills. Now, you do have a planetary war going on in your sixth house. You could find yourself in some difficulties as far as dealing with conflicts or taking care of responsibilities at this time. as Mercury is going to lose this planetary war. Mercury is in post shadow, so it's at this weakened state. And now Jupiter is here in this grand position with Saturn. And so this becomes an area where you might find yourself more inclined to use your wisdom to solve problems or to work towards things. Of course, Saturn gives you that calculated manner, but the logic and the communication skills can suffer from Mercury due to this planetary war, where Mercury doesn't necessarily give you those organizing and logical skills that you need to deal with some of these conflicts. So you may find yourself in a difficulty here where you may want to isolate from others and not communicate in the work life. So there could be this desire to detach yourself a little bit or to have some freedom and say into how you are approaching all of these shifts and changes happening in your work life. You could also find yourself with some health complications that maybe you want to deal with on your own as well. And this could be an area where you really want to seek out some help. Make sure that everything is in order physically and mentally during this time, because we do have Pluto here where there is a lot changing. There's a lot that's really being broken down and dissolved with this Pluto activity. So you really want to be careful of any sort of mental illnesses or physical illnesses. You could suffer here from some depression or anxiety, or there could be some health complications. Really using that Saturn energy to play it safe can really benefit you in a huge way at this time. Now, remember that you have a combust Venus there in your seventh house with Neptune. So, this is aspecting your first house, affecting you directly, where you can see some difficulties in your relationships. You may have some over possessiveness or some jealousy that comes up. You may find yourself really just tired of dealing with other people and this withdrawal happening here. Neptune, of course, being connected to those higher realms of thought. You could find yourself wanting to isolate, or you could find yourself more so wanting to connect spiritually than to what's happening in your physical relationships. So you want to be careful here of trying to retreat or trying not to nurture those connections physically through those relationships, but many of you trying to disconnect and to find nurturing through a more spiritual outlet during this time. And some of those heavy Venus desires, because remember that Venus is not functioning correctly in this combustion, can really take hold during this time. But ultimately, this is a good time for gains in your career again, because we have this Mars and Rahu sitting up in your 10th house, Jupiter also aspecting from that sixth house as well is very powerful. And we have Saturn also aspecting over to your eighth house, which becomes really great for you as well, where you can receive a lot of benefits in your career. Also, Saturn looking at that second house there, where you can use your speech in a powerful way, especially as the moon is crossing over that second house. You could find yourself being more emotional and more in tune with connecting to others, but you want to watch those sudden changes that can happen in your finances as well. So, for those of you with a Virgo moon or Virgo ascendant, we're starting out this week with the moon in your first house. And so, you could be very sensitive, very moody. You could find yourself wanting to change your appearance a lot during this time with Virgo coming into this first house. I'm sorry, with the moon coming into this first house. A lot of fluctuations and changes that can happen with you. And this can affect your relationships. Remember that from that first house, we're always aspecting the seventh house. And so a lot of changes here that can be very noticeable to other people and that can affect those relationships that you have with others as well. Now, moving into the second house, the moon can bring you some difficulties with your finances, where you can see some sudden fluctuations happening here. But ultimately, the moon is only going to be here for a short time. And so, this is something that can subside if you're seeing some difficulties there with your finances, especially with the moon looking at Uranus there in your eighth house, where again you can see some sudden ups and downs and changes. That eighth house, of course, is that house of crisis where there's lots of ups and downs, and Uranus is there with these unexpected results where you can see lots of fluctuations here. You can see increase in wealth, you can see decrease in wealth, you can see fluctuations with your connection to your family as well. You can see fluctuation in your actual diet and eating patterns. So you want to be careful and pay attention to a lot of these changes and shifts that could possibly be taking place here for many of you. Now, from there, the moon is going to shift into your third house. And so the moon will join up with K2, where again, many of you here have had K2 here for a while now, since last year, where you're experiencing a lot of changes in your education. Many of you may have switched cultures, switched religions, switched over to some different subject that you wanted to learn, or have switched in your belief systems, where this is a lot of spiritual knowledge and information coming in that's really making a huge impact on you, where you are able to gather a lot of deep understanding, especially with Rahu sitting there in that ninth house. You can have a lot of occult understanding, a lot of metaphysical understanding, a lot of scientifical understanding coming through. Mars also in there can make you very passionate at this time to learn and to teach. For some of you, if you are looking to start a class to teach others your ideas and concepts, or you're looking to start a new class, or you are in class and you're trying to level up and move on to new things, a lot of these major moments happening for you in your education. Now, in your fourth house is where the moon will end up for the week. And this is an area where you can find yourself wanting to connect more to home. You could see fluctuations in the home, though, at this time that could be due to your career or your tasks and responsibilities that you have to take on out in the world, where there can be some disturbances within the home. There can be some fluctuations there within the home where there's some emotional disturbance with your connections. But also, you could just find yourself more connected to home, more attached to the home at this time, wanting to connect with your mother, especially for some of you during this time, can be very strong. Now, remember that we have this planetary war between Mercury and Jupiter. Very powerful, as Mercury is your chart ruler. But Mercury will lose this battle because Mercury is here in post shadow and Jupiter's backed by Saturn. So, this is a very interesting position for you, as this is not really a strong area for Mercury. At this time, the higher wisdom is really going to win out over the logic and the communication skills as a whole, and this is happening in your fifth house. And so you could find yourself really leveling up in your education through this, but you may find yourself not really seeing the results that you want coming into the beginning of this week. And then all of a sudden, you find yourself leveling up, gaining new status in your education, achieving new goals in your education, or achieving new goals in your projects in your career, anything that you're working on and putting your passion and creativity into. You can see that there may be some unsettling moments in the beginning of this week, but it starts to get better as Jupiter wins out that battle towards the end of the week. Now, we do have a combust Venus. Once again, if you want to know more about that, there is a video on this transit of Venus through Aquarius. Neptune hanging out with this combust Venus as well in your sixth house. So you want to be careful of overindulgence. That sixth house is directly linked to your diet. And for many of you with a Virgo ascendant, especially, you can be very sensitive, and Virgo moons, you can be very sensitive to what you are taking in. And this Venus not functioning correctly can really give you this desire for more. This overindulgence, this desire for sweets can affect you during this time, especially with Neptune there, where you could be emotionally eating. You can be trying to eat things that really help you escape from the difficulties or struggles going on at work or going on with your daily tasks and responsibilities. So you want to be careful in this area that you're not taking on habits or routines that can really be difficult for you when you are moving throughout this week here. Now, Mars and Rahu, of course, are there in your ninth house with the moon and K2 happening in that third house. Great position where you can really level up in your education. You want to be careful, though, of taking shortcuts or cheating in your education. This could happen with Rahu, and especially with Mars there, sort of getting closer to Rahu in this agitation that can happen here, where some of you are more impulsive, you're more agitated, trying to get the results that you want quicker than usual. So you want to be careful with this. Mars from that ninth house is aspecting over to that 12th house, where you could find yourself doing things behind the scenes in your education. This could also be a time where you want to disconnect a little bit to focus more on your studies. And this can be very powerful for you, where you can see some great strides in your education. But you want to be careful with all of this happening here. Jupiter, of course, is making that aspect over to Mars, where again, you can see a lot of education really strongly leveling up for you, for many of you here. But you want to be careful with your relationships also, because Saturn is making that aspect over to your third house, where you could find yourself being very much attached to your relationships. But ultimately, this is a great time to build a solid, steady life for yourself and really avoiding some of these fluctuations that can happen in your routine. Now, for those of you with a Libra moon or Libra ascendant, we're starting off the week here with the moon in your 12th house. And so this is very interesting. This could be a very psychic start of the week for you, where you may be more inclined towards meditation, more inclined towards journaling. This could be a good time to have a dream journal around to keep track of some of the things that your subconscious is trying to pull up for you, where you can gain some greater insight. Now, as the moon shifts into your first house, this is where you can see some fluctuations, where you can change up a lot. You can make a lot of changes as far as your appearance. You could also just find yourself shifting, changing your mind a lot in your life during this start of the week here. And so you want to be careful, as this can cause some problems in your relationship, some unexpected shifts that can happen here as you're sort of changing things up. You want to make sure that everyone is on board, that you are communicating and expressing yourself properly with your partner, whether this is a business partner, a romantic partner, or just people in your life in general, where others may find that you are changing unexpectedly and this is somehow affecting things in a negative way. So, always wanting to use your communication skills, this becomes very strong. From there, the moon will shift over into your third house, where it will meet up with K2 here in Scorpio. And so this can be a great time to communicate. But for a lot of you, you have a lot of knowledge or wisdom that you may be getting from your early upbringing through this transit, with K2 hanging out there in your second house. You could discover a lot about your ancestral line during this time. This could also be a time where you're less concerned with money and material gains. Some of you could be more inclined towards spirituality and connections during this time, especially with the moon joining in with K2. Some of you really focus on your values and trying to find meaning in what really brings you true values in life. A lot that's really changing and transforming as far as your perception on what you value during this time. And the moon really coming in, stirring up, making some fluctuations and changes as well. You could also learn a lot through your relationships, with Mars and Rahu hanging out on the other end in the eighth house, where these changes in values or beliefs could come through your relationships. as well. You could also see yourself really gaining a lot through your joint finances, whether this is through a partnership. You could find yourself more invested in your joint finances more so than your individual finances during this time. With all of this Mars Rahu activity, where you can be very passionate about this, you could also find yourself wanting to dabble into the occult, wanting to dabble into hidden topics more during this time. With Mars there, this impulsiveness, this strong urge and desire is here to really tap deeper into some of these subjects and topics, and especially with Rahu, which is a very eccentric planet. Now, from there, the moon is going to end off this week in your third house. And so you could find yourself with some difficulties around your siblings where the connection there could fluctuate a little bit. You could find yourself off and on in your connection with your siblings. But also, this could be a really great time for you to express your feelings where you're more expressive, you are more inclined towards connection. Some of you wanting to connect deeper, even again with Mars and Rahu, they're in the eighth. Some of you wanting to become more intimate in your connections, especially there can be some strong impulses and desires that are here as far as wanting to connect more deeply. Now, remember that there is a planetary war that's happening between Mercury and Jupiter, and this is happening in your fourth house. And so this is an interesting time where you can find, especially for you, a lot of inner conflict happening. This is the lower mind and the higher mind at war, and the higher mind is going to win out. So you could find yourself, especially at the beginning of this week, a bit confused, a bit dazzled, where you are going back and forth in your mind, this tug of war of trying to think or understand things a little bit more. And Jupiter winning out towards the end of this week here, giving you a little bit more deeper insight and understanding. This is your fourth house, which is connected to past lives and connected to your karma as well. So you could find yourself bringing in a lot of deeper wisdom and knowledge as well during this time that could be spiritual. Now, remember that you have a combust Venus. This is in your fifth house again. Strong desires romantically can happen or in connection in general where you want to connect more deeply. Remember that Venus, though, being your chart ruler, it is not functioning correctly. It's in a combustion where you can find yourself wanting to overindulge in the things that bring you pleasure and enjoyment at this time. So you want to keep some of those impulses under control for some of you, as this could lead you towards some unethical behavior, or this could simply bring out some possessiveness, some jealousy, some overindulgence in some things that bring you pleasure and joy. Especially with Neptune there, there's this feeling of wanting to rely on something or wanting to attach yourself to something emotionally, to hold on to something. And so this can be very difficult during this time. Now, for those of you with a Scorpio moon or Scorpio ascendant, we're starting off this week with the moon in your 11th house. Great placement where you can receive a lot of support from your elders, from your elder siblings, from those in your friend circle. You could find yourself wanting to connect more with those in your friend circle if you had a connection and you were not as involved. You could find yourself falling back into that. The moon is very emotional, remember. So this can be a time where you're starting out this week more empathetic, more so wanting to connect. And then from there, the moon shifts into your 12th house, where you can find yourself really wanting to detach and disconnect. This could be a psychic moment for you where you are going into deep meditation. This could be a good time to keep a dream journal where your subconscious can bring through a lot of information, especially a lot of unexpected information come through. This is the moon aspecting over to Uranus there. Now, you want to be careful of your health also coming into this week, as we have the the moon, which goes through sudden fluctuations, and Uranus, which is a very unexpected planet, affecting these two health houses on this axis of the 6th and the 12th. So you want to be careful here of any anxiety, any depression that can arise. Also, physical health as well. You could find yourself wanting to overindulge with the moon back in that 12th house. So you want to be careful with that coming into this week. But this is definitely a time where you might find yourself wanting to isolate, and you could pull in some deep inspiration and insight that could actually help you in your work life as well. So you might find yourself with some unexpected, ingenious ideas that can really make a huge impact there in your work life. Now, moving ahead, the moon is going to come into your first house where K2 is. Again, a lot of you going through very deep transformations personally, where this year, especially if you're going through a K2 or Rahu Mahadasha, transforming you in a huge way during this time, where you can find yourself doing very well in business, in relationships, any area that is connected to partnership can do very well during this time. So, whether you are working with others, whether you are taking clients, whether you are doing some job that involves dealing with other people, or whether you are involved in a romantic relationship, a lot of growth that can happen there with Rahu and this axis of Ketu. You may find yourself more empathetic, more emotional, which can help you tremendously in your partnership. But some of you during this Mars and Taurus transit also facing some difficulties in relationships. Mars in the 7th house is not a great position. Mars can really bring out some of that conflict. This can bring out ego problems for some of you as Mars is your chart ruler. So you want to be careful with this harshness of speech with Mars looking at your 7th house that could potentially come out during this transit. But ultimately, good time for business. Many of you are more confident during this transit, more so speaking up for yourselves, taking action in this way. This becomes very strong and prominent. The moon from there is going to shift into your 2nd house, where you can see some sudden fluctuation in your wealth. So you want to be careful here. Of course, this is going to only last for a short period of time, but you want to pay attention to your spending habits during this time, making sure that everything is in check. So during this short little transit here of the moon moving through your 3rd house, you may want to remain stable and secure, making sure that you're saving things away during this time. This is the moon also looking at your 8th house, where you could see some sudden shifts even in your joint finances for some of you. So you may need to communicate a little bit more, to speak up a little bit more, to express your feelings around any sort of difficulties that can come up in your closer relationships or within your business partnerships around your finances. Also, this could pertain to simply speaking up and expressing yourself in general in your connections, where you could see some particular issues come up. Of course, many of you here who have Scorpio ascendant or Scorpio moon are very secretive. So this could be a time where you want to pay close attention to this, especially with K2, which is a very mysterious planet in your 1st house. Now, remember that Mercury and Jupiter are in a planetary war, and this is happening in your 3rd house, directly affecting your education. And so, for some of you, you may find that coming into this week that you are struggling or having some difficulties around contemplating making decisions where there's this battle, this tug of war between the lower mind and the higher mind. Now, Jupiter is going to win this battle, so you can find yourself with some deep understanding coming out of this week, some deeper wisdom and knowledge that can really help you to move up in your education, especially as this is aspecting that 9th house, where you can really work your way up the ladder in education. You may find yourself interested in wanting to travel or do different things in that area as well. Again, I know that we're in the middle of a pandemic, but some of you may have some traveling plans on your mind looking into the future. Some of you are traveling, even though we're in a pandemic, as it's connected to work for some of you as well. Now, we do have this combust Venus that is with Neptune in your fourth house. And so this is an area where some of you may want to overindulge in your home life. Some of you finding it difficult to detach from your home life. And again, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so not the most difficult placement for some of you here, but you could find yourself having some difficulties with the connection with your mother, where you could be irritated, you could be tired here of the connection to your home and family in some aspects. And for some of you, you may want to connect deeply with your home and family. So this can vary here in this fourth house. But ultimately, this can affect your career as well, where some of you may be working from home. Some of you may find yourself having some changes or fluctuations that allow you to connect more with home or that take you away from home. And so, for a lot of you, you're looking for that support from your mother or from your home life of Neptune here in the fourth. So, for those of you with a Sagittarius moon or Sagittarius ascendant, we're starting out the week here with the moon in your 10th house. And so this can be an area where you could see some fluctuations or changes in your career life. Again, you want to look at everything that's going on in your chart. This is just a general read. As the moon is passing through this 10th house, you could see some sudden changes going on in the career. This could be a time where you are changing careers or where you're thinking about changing your career or where you're required to make some sort of change in this area as well. This could also be a time where you're more empathetic, where you need to help out and nurture others in your career life as well. So, this can majorly affect your home, though, where you may find that there's some absence from your home life. The moon, all the way up in the 10th house, really looking at that fourth, where you might want to connect more to your home, but you find work sort of pulling you away from this. Or it could be the opposite, where the moon may fluctuate and shift you toward your home environment, but you sort of feel this absence or disconnection where you want to be more invested in your work life. Now, from there, the moon will shift over into your 11th house, great placement, where you can receive a lot of support from your elders. You can receive support from your elder siblings. You can receive support from your friend circles, from your network circles, especially if you're working on projects in your business field. You could see some support there from the people who you're working with, from working in any sort of group projects. You could see some support and some gains that can really help you. And for some of you, you're coming up with these genius ideas that can really make an impact in your career, and other people are supporting this. So this is really great, where unexpectedly you could come up with some knowledge or inspiration or creative ideas that you want to pitch, and finding that support from others can really make an impact where you are really moving up the ladder, where you are really gaining some fame, gaining some recognition during this time, or gaining some wealth. This can really help you. From there, the moon will shift into your 12th house, where we'll meet up with K2. Very spiritual placement, where you may find yourself wanting to connect more spiritually, or may find yourself pulling a lot of information up spiritually. Now, as spiritual as this placement is, there's also the tug of war with Rahu in your sixth house, where you may find that you have this hunger towards work and routine and finding things in the physical more so. And so a lot of this deep spiritual knowledge can come up unexpectedly when you're doing ordinary things around the home or in your work life as well. Now, from there, the moon will shift over into your first house, where you could see some fluctuations happening towards the end of the week here, where you could be wanting to change your physical appearance. You could be going through mood swings. You could just have some sudden changes and fluctuations in your life. Now, you want to make sure you're communicating with your partner, with your business partner, anyone who you're associated with, if you are going through some fluctuations and changes, as this could affect those areas as well emotionally in a big way. Now, from there, Remember that there's going to be a planetary war with Mercury and Jupiter. And this is happening in your second house, where you could find yourself in some heavy contemplation around your wealth and finances, or also around your connections as well, where there could be some difficulties there around making decisions around your family, around your roots, around your values. And this can become much clearer as your ruling planet Jupiter will win over this planetary war towards the end of the week here. So, coming out of this inner conflict or contemplation going on, you can find some understanding and realization coming out of this. This can also give you some great wealth and security. Jupiter, of course, is a karka for wealth and prosperity coming into the second house of your fixed assets. Now, remember that Venus is in a combustion. It's hanging out in that third house with Neptune. And so, this is an area where you may find yourself wanting to connect more with your siblings. And again, there can be some support from your siblings during this time. Now, you want to be careful because some of you may be a little bit codependent in these connections where you're wanting to hold deeply onto your siblings with Neptune there, that aspect of holding on to something or seeking out support in something. So you want to be careful here, but this can tremendously give you support that can help you in your education in a big way, as this is aspecting over to that ninth house. Although there could be some fogginess or difficulty seeing things clearly, especially with this impulsive Venus that is sort of in a difficult position here with the sun. Also, you want to be careful of your health because from that moon and K2 in your 12th, we have Mars and Rahu in your 6th, where you could find yourself in some unexpected difficulties from any sort of shortcuts or accidents that you may be involved in. Where taking shortcuts may not be a great idea for you, this could land you into some trouble with Mars here. Mars in that sixth house can bring about bloodshed and sudden accidents there. So you want to be cautious of that. But ultimately, this gives you a tremendous amount of power in your work life to get things done. Now, for those of you with a Capricorn moon or Capricorn ascendant, starting off this week, the moon is going to be back in your ninth house of higher education. So, this can be a good time for you to level up in your education, where you find yourself thinking on a higher level. Also, you want to be careful here because you can be very emotional about your views, where this can be very difficult in terms of communication. This is the moon looking at your third house, so you could find yourself in a lot of debates and arguments over your beliefs and your mindset in general. This could be very difficult. Also, you could find yourself fluctuating in your views or your religious aspects of life, where there can be this desire to be more spiritual one moment and it can fluctuate to the next. So you want to pay attention to that as well. Now, from there, the moon will shift into your 10th house. And so this can be an area where you're shifting in your career, where you can find yourself wanting to change careers. You can find yourself actually changing careers, even though this is a very short period of time, or you could find yourself just needing to make some sudden changes in your career where you could be called to do a certain task that you're not prepared for. This could potentially happen during your career, or unexpectedly, you could level up to a different position in your career. So, this could happen as well. A lot of unexpected results that you can have that can actually give you tremendous amount of happiness and joy with Uranus sitting there on your fourth house. Now, from there, the moon will move forward into your 11th house, where it will be with K2. And so, this can be an area here where you can see a lot of gains in your life. But here is the interesting thing for those of you with a Capricorn moon or Capricorn ascendant, and that is that you have Rahu in your fifth house, not your 11th. And so, a lot of times with this position, You can find yourself receiving more gains from just working on your own individual projects. So this could be a time where you're working on building your own career, building your own business. Again, this could be connected to that sudden change that you're experiencing in your career life. But ultimately, with K2, K2 is a very spiritual planet where you might be gaining more wisdom and insight more so than actual material gain in life with K2 there in the 11th. Now, from there, the moon shifts back into your 12th house, where again, you could be very spiritual during this time. You could be wanting to connect more with your subconscious and your internal mind. So, this could be a good time of meditation. This could be a good time of keeping a dream journal where your subconscious can give you some good insight in your mind at this time. And this is aspecting over to your sixth house of health. So you do want to be careful of overindulgence during this time. This can bring up some sudden fluctuations in your health. Now, remember that we have this planetary war of Mercury and Jupiter going on coming into this week as well. And so coming into this week, you could find yourself a little bit unstable, especially because this is in your first house. And so you could find yourself a bit indecisive. You could find this mental battle going on inside of you where you're a little bit unstable here, but things becoming more clear towards the end of the week as Jupiter wins out this planetary war, where you can gain a lot of wisdom and a lot of greater insight towards the end of the week. You also want to remember that you have a combust Venus there in your second house. So there could be some strong desires towards material wealth where you can be overly possessive, overly indulgent, even in your eating habits, that second house being connected to the mouth as well. So you want to be careful of leaning on things or needing to rely on things to give you this satisfaction. This can be very difficult and this can cause a lot of sudden fluctuations and sudden changes where you can actually end up in some very difficult situations as it's looking at that eighth house of crisis. So you want to be careful here about this desire for more in terms of wealth, in terms of overindulgence that can really take hold. Now, for those of you with an Aquarius moon or Aquarius ascendant, we're starting off the week here with the moon in your eighth house. So, this is very interesting where you could start off this week here with a lot of mood swings, a lot of difficult situations that can arise. You want to keep in mind, though, that this is a short period. So, the moon is going to leave this eighth house very quickly. So any sort of unexpected changes and fluctuations that are happening here are not going to last. Now, this can also affect your wealth because this is the moon looking at your second house. And so you could find some fluctuations here in your wealth. You could find fluctuations in your family that are happening due to this moon in the eighth. Again, this is not a period that will last long. This is going to shift over to your ninth house where you could find yourself more higher minded, more ingenious thoughts, especially as this is the moon looking at Uranus in your third house, where you can come up with unexpected, ingenious wisdom and thoughts that can come out of nowhere. You can come up with these inspiring ideas, and this can really help you tremendously in your education. You could even be thinking of teaching or giving wisdom and insight to others, or seeking out insight from your teachers and guides during this time, where your teachers, your father, anyone who's inspiring you can really nurture you and give you a tremendous amount of support at this time that could lead to an unexpected thought or unexpected skill that you're tapping into at this time. Now, from there, the moon will shift into your 10th house where it will meet up with K2. And so, again, a lots of changes for many of you with an Aquarius ascendant where you're becoming more spiritual during this time. Of course, with K2 there in your first house, but really, this could be an emotional time where you're really emotionally tapped into your spiritual path or calling that some of you have decided to take. Also, some of you deciding to work with some mystical knowledge as well. With Rahu there in your fourth house, it's very interesting where many of you are very much desiring to connect more deeply into your spirituality and into your roots, more so than something that is out in the external world. With Mars there in your fourth house, you could find yourself deeply invested in your home. A lot of passion there where you are very protective of your home. You are very much investing a lot of energy into your home at this time. You want to be careful, of course, because Mars on the negative side can bring some conflicts into the home as well as you're going on this higher path or journey. From there, the moon will end up in your 11th house, where you can receive a lot of gains and support from your elders. Again, during this time, you may seek out some support or guidance from a teacher, and you can receive a lot of nourishment and support from these people who you are seeking out that guidance from at this time. But you can receive a lot of wealth, a lot of support from those people in your social networks. Now, remember that there's a planetary war that's happening between Mercury and Jupiter. And this is going to happen back in your 12th house, where there is a lot subconsciously happening, where you can find yourself with a lot of contemplation and difficulty back in the subconscious, where there's a lot of things coming up subconsciously, especially with Pluto and Saturn back in there. A lot of you are going through some very deep spiritual subconscious transformations that are happening where things are being broken down and new realities are being brought to your attention. You also want to keep in mind that you have a combust Venus in your first house with Neptune. And so overall, you can have very strong impulses and desires in all areas of your life. And this can take hold where you find yourself wanting to rely on something or needing something to rely on that can really bring about some difficulties, especially in your relationships. So you want to be careful with this as you are here in this week and throughout this transit here of Venus and Aquarius. Again, if you'd like to know more about this transit, feel free to check out that video on Venus and Aquarius. Last but not least, for those of you with a Pisces moon or Pisces ascendant, we're starting off this week with the moon in your seventh house. And so you can see a little bit of a fluctuation happening in your relationships where you're sort of off and on. You can be more so connected in your relationships where you find that your partner is more empathetic, more understanding with the moon here in the seventh house, aspecting that first house where others are more kind and considerate towards you during the beginning of this transit. Now, from there, the moon will shift into your eighth house where you can see some sudden fluctuations and changes within your life. Again, you could find yourself connecting more deeply within your relationships, this eighth house dealing with those deeper components of a relationship. But also, you could find yourself with some difficulties as far as joint finances, where you could see some fluctuation and changes. Some unexpected things could happen with your wealth and security during this time. So, you want to be careful here in this area, making sure that everything is in check with Uranus there in that second house. Now, from there, the moon will shift over into your ninth house where it will meet up with K2. And so this is an interesting area. A lot of you gaining a lot of deep spiritual knowledge and wisdom at this time with K2 there. K2, of course, is a very mystical planet, bringing a lot of hidden things to the surface. And so for many of you, especially as Scorpio rules this house for you, a lot of you have been investigating and digging up a lot of deeper wisdom and understanding during this time. Both Mars and Rahu in your third house, you're trying to intellectually understand a lot and a lot of passion that is there in your communication and in your intellect, where you really want to get these strong messages across to others. So you want to be careful here about harsh speech, especially as this is your third house of communication. You could get into some conflicts and debates with this energy and Rahu here. You could find yourself in endless debates and conflicts where this never ceases to end. So some difficulties that can play out there. From there, the moon will end up in your 10th house of career. So you could find some fluctuations and changes happening in your career life where you could find yourself thinking about changing careers. You could find yourself needing to make changes, whether you're put in a situation where some changes need to take place, where you need to take care of or nurture a position that you were not before. So this could take place as well. But remember that this is a short period, so this will not last. Now, this is looking at your fourth house, so these changes in career can really affect your home life, where you could have some changes that bring you closer to home or farther away from home, depending on how that moon is affecting you. Of course, you want to always look at where the moon is in your chart, how strong that moon is. Different phases of the moon can affect you in different ways. Now, remember that we have this planetary war that's happening between Mercury and Jupiter, and this is happening up in your 11th house, where you can see some difficulties in your friend circles, where there's a lot of change and fluctuation. There's a lot of arguments and disagreements that can come up. Again, you want to watch out for that Mars Rahu combo in that third house, where you could see some difficulty with understanding different points of view with others, or others understanding your point of view. Mercury is heavily damaged here, where some of you could have some difficulty communicating your beliefs in a way that others can understand or appreciate. This is looking at that fifth house, so this could also pertain to your projects, to your creativity, where you're trying to express these skills. You can see some difficulties there, but as we come towards the end of the week, Jupiter is going to win out this planetary war with Mercury. And so this can give you some greater understanding towards the end of the week. Also, remember that you have a combust Venus with Neptune back in the 12th house. Dangerous position. You want to watch out for your health. Make sure that you're not overindulging, that you're not spending too much time in isolation where you could potentially be overindulging and taking on too many things that can really damage your health in general. So you want to watch out for that. Stay focused on your task, on your routine, on your health. This can greatly improve your life at this time. So that was my interpretation for the horoscope of this week for all 12 zodiac signs. Now we're going to go to the card of the week for all of you collectively. So the card that comes up here is Leo. So the card for the week of March 1st through the 7th of 2021 is Leo. And if you can see this on the card, it says leader, impassioned, energetic. So this is a week about stepping up, taking action, sticking to your task, getting things done. Again, for a lot of you, there's a lot of strong desires. There's a lot of impulses that could potentially come up with that combust Venus and with Mars and Rahu together. A lot of unexpected changes with Uranus that's playing in with the moon as well in the sign of Libra. So you want to be careful here, making sure that everything is in balance, everything is taken care of, that you're on top of things. Again, in that leadership role where you're taking care of things, making sure that everything is in order and that you're on top of everything. And for some of you, you can really move up in positions of leadership at this time, where you could see some growth overall in your career. You could see some growth in your education for some of you. So this can be a huge time for you to really level up and to take action to strive towards your goals. So I hope you all enjoyed this. If you like this video, feel free to leave a thumbs up as well as a comment. If you are new to this channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button along with the notification bell. If you are interested in learning Vedic astrology more in depth, I do have a class available in the Facebook group, Astrology Lessons with Daquan Jones, and on Patreon. And I will continue to keep you all updated on when this becomes available on Udemy as well. If you want to know more, again, about these transits that we're going through with Venus in Aquarius and with Mars in Taurus, again, I'll leave links down below in the description for you. If you have anything that you'd like me to talk about as far as Vedic astrology goes on this channel, feel free to leave it down below in the comments as well, and I will get to you in a future video. I hope you all have a great day and a great week. and a great month of March as we're entering into a brand new month here. And I will see you all in the next video.